Welcome to the series Designing Your Way Forward. Joining me today is Oleksandr, a product designer with more than 6 years of experience building both B2B and B2C products and acquiring users through thoughtful design. Alex, welcome. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and your journey?
Sure, no problem. Again, I'm Alex. I'm currently in London for almost 4 years, working in an amazing company called Meta. Before that, I was part of one of the biggest Ukrainian startups called Preply, which is one of the biggest tutor marketplaces in the world, and Riddle. It was the company that created apps even before App Store for iOS, and it was among first 50 companies that were invited by Apple to start building products for App Store.
What an amazing journey. And you've worked on products used by billions. Can you share a moment when a design decision directly influenced a growth metric at Instagram?
Sure. So I'm currently working in monetization of Instagram and Facebook. So in generally, everything is directly influenced by design. Why that? Because in generally, our design culture is among the best across all of the products I worked before. All changes that we're doing, all experiments that we're doing are going through a really detailed process where our design leadership involved, a lot of reviews are involved, and everything is only for saying that okay, this specific experiment can bring value. And almost everything there relates to the design. What I mean by that, for example, through that process of reviews, if, for example, we're saying, okay, we're changing CTA button in our ads on stories, on IG stories, it will go through a detailed process where designer needs to build a really dedicated presentation where this presentation will answer a lot of questions about quality, saying, okay, how this experiment relates to the principles that Instagram created, why this experiment needs to exist, what are the directions we can do, and a lot of things that in generally influences the growth. And it is a really tough questions to answer, because overall, all of the experiments that we're doing on Instagram, especially in monetization, heavily involves design and what the decisions designers are doing.
And shifting gears a bit, many early stage startups prioritize features and speed. What are the early warning signs that design is being treated as an afterthought, and how does that backfire?
Okay, good question. Overall, I think that while I spoke a lot with different startups, I understood that a lot of startups are taking the idea of MVP, like minimal viable product, meaning that a lot of startups without the designer starts to build a lot of functionality because they think that as fast as possible is the best approach to get certain traction. But overall, I'm a big fan of another idea called SLC, which means simple, lovable, and complete. And here designer perfectly fits in that startup ecosystem and in early stage, meaning that the designer can influence it by focusing on creating design that will make the product simple, meaning that it will not solve the hundreds of problems without really solving them. It will solve one problem, but it will solve it completely. It is lovable, meaning that craft is used there, meaning that when users trying that product, they will understand that a lot of thought was taken in consideration, and generally product is really exciting to use. And it is complete, meaning that all of the edge cases and all of the flow was thought by the designer and was iterated. And this approach really helps early stage startups to have really great results, because without that, engineers are creating tons of experiments. There becomes a really big legacy of things that are really not complete, and it creates the product in the end that doesn't bring any value. And a lot of times I saw that these products pivoted and started from scratch.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of making smart design choices, how do you personally balance between making data-driven design iterations and trusting your creative instincts?
I think overall that data is only the signal that, for example, a great designer, from my perspective, takes this signal to see patterns of how the signals can really direct, for example, the product in a good direction. And from my experience all the time, while I'm at Instagram or different or startups before Instagram, I use the data only to create a really good context of that goes before I'm proposing an idea. I'm proposing the hypothesis or experiment, whatever, that this data creates a clarity for people, saying that, okay, based on this research and based on these things, we understood that people want this, or people doesn't want, or people do not want that. But it never gives a clear direction where you need to go. It is only a signal, and based on this signal, I see certain pattern. I involve my previous experience, I involve this data signal, I involve speaking with my team, only to gather all of that and create a good hypothesis or idea that, again, after that, we're iterating and testing.
Indeed, that balance between analytics and creativity is something many designers wrestle with. And for junior designers who find themselves in non-design-led environments, what's your advice on how they can still push for impactful design?
I think overall I can summarize that in 2 bullet points. Designer needs to influence, and designer need to have a good skill in storytelling. What I mean by that is that overall designers exist because they're the best influencers. They're the best storytellers. Only the designer can, not only, but I will say that designer is the best person to collect all of the knowledge and gather it to make, for example, a vision of what the startup might look like in the end and how we can get there. Meaning to that what types of milestones we need to build to get to that vision. And designer is like the perfect person to get there. And the main problems that I see that designers are a little bit scary to influence. They're a little bit scary to tell a good story or showcasing this vision. But in the end, I think it is the most important thing that designer needs to do. Like building like a detailed prototypes, showing the vision, showing how we can get there. And for sure, involving a lot of business metrics. It is not about saying, okay, here is a fancy design and we need to go there. No, it needs to be a really good storytell, again, of collecting data, collecting my experience, committing a lot of thoughts of how it can move, for example, retention, acquisition, and all other important metrics, and create this vision and creating a clear steps how we can get to that vision. So overall, I think that my biggest advice for junior designers is that they need to be partners. They don't need to be, for example, a pixel pushers of, or for example, engineers coming to them and saying, okay, I need to have this design, like move this pixel, move that pixel. I don't believe in that collaboration. I think that the most influence that designer can do is to become a partner who is really giving the clarity of where the company can go, where the product can go, and how it can get there by showcasing multiple prototypes, a lot of research, a lot of things that in generally can get all of this influence and making this designer to be a really essential part of, for example, a startup or a bigger company.
And now shifting to another hot topic, virality and habit-forming design. We often talk about building viral loops and boosting retention, but I'm curious, what are some common design choices that unintentionally kill virality or retention?
It is a good question. I think that the biggest mistake that teams are doing is that they look a lot on their competitors and they're copying their ideas without really giving a thought of why they did that. One of the most popular things I see right now is that a lot of applications, especially, are doing really long and complex onboarding experiences, which really says that, okay, maybe this onboarding can make the experience to be personalized. But I personally do not believe in that. I am a big believer in the idea that you need to bring value as soon as possible to the user, and the best apps are always about making this journey as fast as possible to the aha moment. And I think the biggest mistakes that really companies are doing is that they're copying these fancy ideas of, okay, saying, let's do 20-step onboarding so the experience will be perfectly personalized, but in the end they see that retention is almost zero and acquisition is also low. So I personally believe that, especially for the designer, is that when you build something, you don't need to only be inspired by other companies without even giving a thought of why they did that. You always need to think, okay, why they did that, how I can replicate it in my own app, but with an additional thought of how I can make it more clear, how I can make it really personalized in the way that it will be, first of all, how we can get user to the aha moment as fast as possible. And in general, I feel that a lot of these things that especially kills virality, kills retention, are only about copying without even giving a thought.
Well, thank you, Alex, for your valuable insights. Thanks to our listeners for joining us for this first episode. And stay tuned for our next, where we'll eventually explore how storytelling, as you mentioned it, Alex, can become your most powerful tool.
Perfect. Thank you so much.